Welcome to the Cripple Chronicles, a podcast about ilizarov frames, amputation, and the journey to accepting and embracing disability. I am your host and favourite cripple, Becca, and today is episode 5. Up until this point, we have covered my accident, me getting the first frame, it coming off, my infection, being in hospital again, getting sued, and then my little rant that you seen last week. However, we are back on track today, and I am going to get back to the timeline of my recovery and talk more about the process of moving my bones with the second ilizarov frame, recovery in terms of more surgery and physio input, and covering the ups and downs in the 2 years that I had my second frame. Before I get into it, if you are watching on YouTube, hello, leave me a like and subscribe. If you are listening on audio platforms, please rate. I'm going to say it again at the end, but I'm going to just drop it in just now whilst I have the chance. And if you want to follow me on Instagram or TikTok, it is Cripple Chronicles Pod. And if you have anything you would like to email me, it is cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com. Let's get into this week's episode. So, I left off the timeline of recovery when I was breaking out of the hospital and getting home after I had my second frame put on. The pain that I was in, the painkillers that I was taking didn't seem to be helping it, and I was moving my bones 4 times a day in 2 separate places, and there was maybe 4 or 5 bolts around one ring that I had to turn. So these bolts I had to turn just a wee bit 4 times a day. So the small increments that we're doing was 0.25 millimetres, which meant when I added up over a day, it was 1 millimetre. When I had my accident, I think my bone was 7 centimetres shorter, and with the first frame there was no lengthening, and then there was roughly another 16 centimetres of bone cut away. So there was a lot of bone that I had to grow in that time. After about 3 months of doing this constant changing, I was eventually told that my bones were nearly where they needed to be, and I was going to have a bone graft implemented in my knee, which came from a bone bank, which I thought was really odd, because I was like, well, if I'm getting a bone graft, does that piece of my bone have to come from somewhere else in my body? And they had said it's kind of like a blood bank, that they have a bone bank. And when I was getting my leg amputated, I think I'd said to one of my friends, I was like, oh my God, do you think they'll use the bone of my leg for the bone bank? But to be honest, I don't think it was probably stable enough for that. But it is just interesting to think about. When I had this appointment, I was still in a lot of pain after the 3 months, and I didn't really think that it was coming from me moving the bones in my leg, because in the support groups that I had been in, it was more common that there would be pain like straight after moving the bolts, and then it would kind of subside. But mine was just there all the time, and I just kept thinking that something was wrong, that it was an infection, that they hadn't got it all, that they were going to take off this frame and the exact same thing was going to happen. However, like when I stopped turning those bolts, the pain stopped. At this point, I would have given anything just to live my life without being restricted, being able to go out and not use any mobility aids, not to feel as if I was taking up too much space when I was in places in my wheelchair, just not to be like this. There's some days where I still really feel like that, especially if I'm in spaces where it's quite confined and there's a lot of people. I feel like I'm taking up too much space just by simply existing, and it is so difficult, but it's not as prominent as it was before. It's not something that crops up as much as it used to. Round about October 2020, I had my job position as a nurse finally terminated. When I had my accident, I had conversations with occupational health and with the management, and they basically told me that I had a year, and I knew that that year was up, but it really didn't make it any easier. It just really still fucking hurt. And it was that pain that's like really deep inside of your chest, because I felt like being a mental health nurse was my calling and my purpose in life. And all I wanted to do was get back to nursing and get back to helping people. And at that time, I just felt like it was all slipping through my fingers. Sometimes when the memories pop up of graduation or me getting that staff nurse position, or when I think about the time when my contract was terminated, it really gets to me. And that's the grief. That's the reminders of the person who I was before I had my accident that I don't think there's any going back to. I don't still feel that purpose and calling towards nursing anymore, because so much has changed in that time. After this, I then got a call to offer me a date for surgery number 8, which was to put the bone graft inside of my knee to solidify it. And the date that I was offered was the 17th of December, which I really had to go away and think about and talk to my family if this was the best decision, because I had already spent the Christmas the year before doped up on morphine, having to have my family to come and see me in hospital. I didn't want to be in hospital at that time, never mind them spending their holidays visiting me in the hospital. And with it being COVID and only allowed to have one visitor when I got my infection, I didn't want that to happen, and I was so scared. But with it being the festive season and with surgeons taking holidays and things like that, I think they had said if I didn't accept the date, it would probably be February or March before I would get the surgery. I had a lot of tears, I had a panic attack, and I was just so sick of hospitals at this point. I had racked up 5 out of 12 months spent in the hospital. I really just didn't want to spend any more time isolated in a hospital room. I phoned back and I accepted the date because I knew at that point it was what was needed for my recovery, and I just had to accept that if I was going to be in hospital over Christmas, then that was just how it was going to have to be. It was coming up to the year anniversary of the accident, a whole year since my life had changed in the blink of an eye. I had worked so hard to drag myself through uni, and I finally felt as if I was making a future for myself that I had never seen, because I didn't think that I would make it to 16 and then every birthday after that. I thought I would have been dead by then. And when it came to the end of uni and I got my job, I really started to feel like I had that sense of what a future was going to be. And then I go out one morning and that's completely shattered into pieces, along with various parts of my body. Oh, fucking hell. I really thought that finishing uni and getting my job was the start of a new chapter of my life. I just didn't realise that that new chapter was nearly going to be the end of the book, and that it was going to end up in me having to go through 7, almost 8 surgeries in a year. I really wanted to be able to look at the positives, but on that first anniversary, I couldn't see past the sadness and the anger of why I was in this situation, and questioning why it had to happen to me and how was I going to continue to live my life like this. I just had to let it be a bad day. I just had to say, okay, today's not it. I just need to wake up tomorrow and carry on. That's the best that I can do. I went for the surgery to get the bone graft put in my knee, and I had a bit of a nightmare when it came to getting to the hospital with patient transport not coming on time, and I'd phoned them. I think it had got to half an hour before my surgery time. I stayed about 45 minutes from the hospital, and I phoned up patient transport because I was really worried that they had cancelled and they weren't going to show up. And they had said, oh no, it's okay, the crew is on their way for you. And I was like, well, do you know when it's going to be? Because my surgery is meant to be in half an hour. And they says, well, when people are going for surgeries, we don't actually have a time that you get picked up from. It's just either like morning or afternoon. So then I had to come off the phone and phone up the hospital and say, look, patient transport hasn't turned up for me, but I am definitely still coming for this surgery. Like, don't worry, I will be there. And it just caused so much anxiety because I had to do that. And I really didn't want to have to do that because I knew that in a few hours' time I was going to be getting put to sleep and getting surgery done on me. And that could have been so easily avoided. I got there and I got checked in, and funnily enough, when I'd got to like the wee room to do the paperwork and stuff like that, it was actually a girl that I had went to uni with, and she had sat down and she was like, do you recognise me? Is it okay if I do your assessment? I can go get somebody else. And I was like, look, it's totally fine. We weren't even in the same course. I was doing mental health nursing, she was doing general nursing. We had kind of seen each other about, but it wasn't as if we were friendly. And she had actually said to me that the day that I had had my accident, she was working in A&E when I had come in, and she had been kind of wondering how I had been doing, which really shows you that is now a couple of people that I have mentioned that really do remember you. And I found that myself in nursing. I'm terrible with names, and sometimes I'm not the best with faces, but some patients really kind of just stick in your brain for some reason, and you say, oh, I've actually kind of wondered about how you were doing. I think there was a time where I got on the bus and I thought, geez, that woman looks really familiar, and I thought, geez, I nursed her. Like, it's nice to kind of see people out in the community, but I don't think I would kind of approach somebody and be like, oh, how are you doing? Because that's not my place. Anyway, back to the point. Sidetracked again. They had decided that they were going to try and give me a spinal block for this surgery. And I think other than amputation, this was one of the worst experiences I had with like getting put to sleep for surgery. I am used to being put to sleep in the little anaesthetic room. However, I was taken into the theatre and I had to get up and sit on the bed. And then the woman came in and she just started jabbing me in the back with a needle. And it was not a fun experience, to say the least. I was just overtaken with a wave of anxiety, and I started having a panic attack. And I can remember her telling me, like, just to keep my back straight. And I don't know if I was thinking it or if I actually said it out loud, but I was like, you are literally stabbing needles into my back. How can I sit up straight? And it got to the point where she'd said, look, do you just want me to put you to sleep? And I was like, yeah, I think you are going to have to just put me to sleep, because I can't do this. Like, I really can't do this right now. And that was it. I got the general anaesthetic and off to sleep I went. After I had the surgery and I was in recovery, I had to get one of the surgeons to come and kind of check me over, because I had one of the, I can't remember what they're called, but they're like big inflatable things that go over you and then they put like heat into them to keep you warm. So I had that because my leg and my foot was really cold. I didn't have any movement in my ankle. And a surgeon kind of came and checked me over and said everything was fine. However, I kind of learned after that it wasn't fine, because after I had this surgery, the movement in my right ankle that I had had for the last year just stopped. my ankle ended up being in a dropped down position. I really struggled to move it again. And I don't know why that was. But I guess right now, that's not really an issue because it's gone with my leg. I was sent up to the ward and I was ready for discharge 2 days later. It was, other than the frame removal in the private hospital, it was the quickest discharge that I had had, especially for being so worried about it before I was going to the hospital. But of course, another issue with patient transport, we had phoned and they had said, look, we're actually not going to be able to collect you for at least 3 days. That meant it was going to be the 23rd of December, and that was just cutting it far too close for me, to be honest. So I took another bit of a risky decision and I decided to phone a taxi, thinking that Glasgow would probably have better wheelchair accessible taxis than the town that I stayed in, which I was correct, they did. The taxi came and I managed to get in at no bother and I got myself home. I had Christmas and New Year of 2020 and it was definitely a change from the previous year. I think 2020 was the year that we went back into lockdown over Christmas. So my dad and stepmum were meant to be coming down to spend Christmas, but we went into lockdown. So Ryan was sent out to the shop kinda a few days before to buy us a turkey. And me and Ryan had Christmas on our own quite a few times. So it really did kind of feel similar to old times. And the dinner was absolutely banging, like, can never fault Ryan's cooking. And when it comes to Christmas, that's one of the best parts of the day, is just getting good scran and enjoying it. There was a lot of reflection on what had happened and what I had managed to get myself through. I was finally starting to embrace the strength and the power that I actually had within myself, that I had always downplayed and just said that wasn't really there, that I was a weak person. And this whole experience really proved to me, like, bitch, you're the furthest thing from weak. Following from the hospital admission where they had given me the use of the friendly torture device to bend my knee, I was referred to the community physios. They were initially coming out to the house, but I wasn't in a good headspace for physio at that moment, and I really saw no point because I was just so deep in it, and I thought, I can't get out of the house, I can't get into a car, I can hardly sit anywhere other than my wheelchair without me being in pain. What is the point of me doing physio exercises, because nothing is going to change? They ended up making my mental health worse at the beginning, because when they were coming out to the house, I had a lot of exercises that were wanting me to do. I think there was like 3 different exercises and it was meant to be like 3 or 4 times a day. And at that point, I was struggling to even get myself out of bed and get washed and make myself something to eat. Like the basics of looking after yourself. I didn't have the energy or the motivation to be doing these tasks, and I don't know if it was in a different way, if we had maybe said, okay, we'll take one of these and I'll try and do it 3 times in the week, instead of saying you need to do this every single day 4 times a day, because it just put so much pressure on me that I didn't want to do it. The last time that they had come out to the house, I felt almost kind of pressured that they were wanting me to go on antidepressants. They were kind of saying, well, why don't you speak to your doctor? And I was like, I don't think you're understanding. Antidepressant might give me the chemicals in my brain, but it's not going to fix my leg. It's not going to take the frame off. And that is the issue right now. That is the problem. And I don't want to just mask it. I want to feel better with where I am at. One of the women had said to me, look, we have to do things that we don't want to do. I mean, I don't want to do discharge paperwork, but if I don't do it, it doesn't get done. And I actually said to her, I really don't think you are understanding what I'm saying. I don't want to wake up in the morning. I don't want to be here. 80% of my energy is spent on actually just getting myself through the day. That is not the same thing. And after that, we went into the kitchen and we were doing some leg exercises, kind of stretches and things like that. And she had said to me, well, what would you say to your friend if they were going through something similar? And I said, well, I would say that whatever they are doing, I believe that they are doing their best. And when they feel better and they feel like they can do more, then that is enough. And she says, well, do you really think that's helpful? And I'm like, well, that's what I need right now. Throughout this, I was crying quite a lot. And Ryan was working from home at the time. He actually came in after she had left and he was like, I really had to stop myself from coming in here and telling her to fuck off. But I know you're an adult and I know you can do it yourself. And I ended up saying to him, yeah, I can do it myself, but I know that I need this support in place. And if I told her to fuck off, that would have been the end of it. I had to have another minor surgery as where they had put the bone graft into my leg. My wound kept on opening up. It wasn't closing and it was actually getting bigger. I was admitted to hospital and I thought it was just going to be a case of sewing it shut and that would be me. However, things are never that straightforward for Becca, are they? No. So they went in and found out that it was actually infected a little bit. So there I was again, stuck in the hospital and hooked up to antibiotics. During the time I was in the hospital, I actually spoke to one of the physios about the treatment that I had been getting whilst I was in the community, because at this point I had already relearned how to walk maybe 2 or 3 times, and I had never had a physio make me feel like that. Not when I was in the hospital, so it shouldn't be happening whilst I'm in my own home. And I just felt so worthless and like nothing that I was going to do was going to be enough because I couldn't do what they were expecting me to. The physio in the hospital was very compassionate and understanding and everything that you would hope for in a health professional. And she had suggested that I maybe tried to go to the physio as an outpatient instead of them coming to my house. And we also discussed the option, if that didn't work, then I would be able to travel and go to physio up at the hospital campus where my surgeon was based. So there was other options. After this, the physio that I had spoke to in the hospital had actually written to my GP and the community physio service, and she had asked the GP for me to be referred for mental health support. I got a bit annoyed at it because I didn't realise this referral had been made in any kind of way. And when the doctor phoned me, she was kind of trying to push me on antidepressants, which reminded me of the community physios. And I was like, oh, I am so annoyed at this. And she had said, okay, I'll refer you to the mental health team. And at that point, I had said, well, if they're just going to tell me it's a physical issue, I'm not interested. But they referred me anyway. When I had my first outpatient physio appointment, it was one of the women who had been out giving me physio at home, and I was really anxious about it because I didn't know if it was just going to be the same thing. However, it seemed like there was a lot of difference. I was kind of getting more praise instead of being made to feel as if I wasn't doing enough. I ended up getting changed to a locum physio who I got on with really well, and we started working on bending my knee and how much pressure I have in it. So pushing my leg up against them to build that resistance in my knee, bending it over the side of the bed. We even did things like trying to kick a football about. He made a joke about oh, next week we'll try and get you on the treadmill. However, me being me, sometimes when people are joking, I take it a wee bit too literally. So I went home and I was saying to my pals, oh my God, he is absolutely insane. He thinks I'm going to be able to go on that treadmill. I'm going to die. And I got back in the next week and he kind of hadn't mentioned it, and I think it was a few weeks after, and I had brought it up and he was like, Becca, you do know I was joking, like I wasn't being serious about that. It really started to help me realise that going to physio every week was helping me make small improvements, even if the frame was still on. Each week, Ryan would take me to the physio department, which was literally like just across the road from where we stayed, and just having that like 10 minutes of fresh air outside of the house was so helpful for my mental health. I feel like what I'm about to say is kind of a theme throughout everything, even some days now. I was trying, but I was still just really fucking struggling. I was in the process of trying to accept that there was no going back. My leg was going to be fused. There was going to be things that I would never be able to do again. Would I still be able to be a nurse? How would I be able to react in an emergency situation? What if somebody needed CPR and I couldn't get down on my knees? How was I going to be able to do all of these things? Would I be able to drive again? I really just wanted to sleep all the time. I had received some money from my work after my contract was terminated, and I spent some of that money on an iPad and the rest of it paying off some debts that I had racked up whilst training to be a nurse. The iPad and doing digital art became a very good outlet for my brain and distracting from pain. I started drawing what was in my mind. On the days when I was having really bad pain days, I would have like digital colouring books and I would try and focus on that, because trying to distract from the pain was better than just sitting and being depressed and feeling sad and angry because of it. The art that I ended up creating, like, my friends were really supportive of it and they had kind of encouraged me to set up an Etsy, which I did. Making an Etsy, I don't think it was really for me, because art was kind of an outlet. I drew things when I wasn't feeling the best, and trying to kind of start a shop and things like that, it requires you to actually make like content to promote your shop, and I'm just not really good at that side of it. I have also kind of struggled whilst doing the podcast that I can sit down and I can talk and I can sit and I can edit it, but when it comes to clipping things down and remembering to post those clips, I'm really bad for it, but I am trying. I was going to physio, I was trying to get up and I'm moving about when I was in the house, and the OTs eventually managed to get me a sit-to-stand recliner chair, which meant I finally had somewhere to sit outside of my bed and my wheelchair. And given it wasn't the widest, so my frame kind of still sat up the side of it, which was slightly uncomfortable, but it was more comfortable than sitting in my wheelchair. I was drawing and I was finding an outlet. I was coping, but also struggling at the same time. I was getting pin site infections. Anytime anything was feeling slightly off, I was just so anxious that it was a sign of a deeper infection. There was one night where it took me a very long time to take my medication because I was just in such a shit headspace. It took me about 2 hours to actually be able to put my medication into the cup and take them, because the thoughts were so loud that I could take all of that medication and not have to do this anymore. I could take all of that medication and not have to wake up again. It was such a hard fight not to do that, not to give up. One of the main things about that was my family had already seen me nearly die, and I had seen the impact that it had on my family and the people that loved me, and I couldn't do that to them. At that point, I actually remember it making me kind of pissed off a wee bit, that I was like, do you know something that really fucking sucks? When you are suicidal and you have been through something like that and you have seen the damage that it has caused to the people that you care about, I can't do that to other people, and that is my only fucking way out right now. That is such a hard place to be in, and such a hard place to try and claw yourself out of. But again, I did it because I'm not somebody that gives up, if that hasn't been very apparent through all of this. In May of 2021, I had an appointment where my surgeon told me that my bones were all healing how they were supposed to be, that things were looking really positive. He had said that he was going to make me an appointment for 8 weeks' time, and hopefully at that appointment we would finally be able to think of a plan for the frame coming off. I really thought that it was going to be that easy. Wrong! It was coming up to a year of me being told that my first initial injuries had healed, the date of the first frame removal, and I was trying to do more normal day-to-day things. I was going out for some dinner with family, but of course that had to come with its own little side of complications and straight up ableism. We had already encountered the challenges of being able to find a wheelchair accessible taxi. However, we were going out for dinner and my dad had phoned a taxi company and they had said, yep, that's fine, we have a wheelchair accessible taxi. That was fine. So 2 days before we were meant to go, my dad had phoned just to see that everything was still okay, and they had said, oh, actually, we were going to phone you. We are not going to have a wheelchair accessible taxi in the area on that day anymore, so you're going to have to pay £40 extra. And it was going to be £40 extra each way. So in total, it was going to be 80 quid for a taxi journey that would have probably cost £8. And what? Because I was disabled, because I couldn't get in a normal taxi. Like, what the fuck? We ended up having to walk it. I think it is usually about a 20-minute walk. However, with the pavement conditions, we had to take the long way, so it took us about 45 minutes. By the time that we got to where we were having dinner, I was absolutely gubbed. Like, the movement from the pavement and things like that and the pins moving about, I was in quite a lot of pain, but I still did it, and that was the main thing. We nearly got through the full meal without anybody making any comment about the frame. That felt really good to me, because any time I had been out, I had always been people getting looks, and if I was in the shop, people would come up and say, oh, what happened to you? Like, I'm really just trying to live my life. I know that you're curious about it, but leave me alone. The server had came to take her bill and she was like, oh, did you have an accident? And I was like, oh, I nearly had a full dinner without anybody saying anything, and you've just ruined it. And I was just kind of like, yeah, I was in a car accident, and left it at that, because I don't really want to get into it. Like, I was just trying to enjoy my night. I always used to think before I had the accident that people were looking at me and talking about me and laughing at me, and it made me so anxious. And now I know that people actually are looking at me and they are curious, and that some people do talk behind our back and, oh, I wonder what happened to her. Like, it's not a very nice feeling sometimes, but I know that it happens, and I know that there's nothing that I can really do to stop it, to be honest. I couldn't believe that it was nearly a year since I had been told that my bones were healed and that the frame could come off, and it felt so quick and so slow at the same time. To be honest, I think that time is just one big illusion anyway. Sometimes the simulation's on slow mode and sometimes it's sped up a wee bit. Anyway, so I was feeling like I should have my life back by now. A life, full stop, because I wasn't living. I was just surviving, clawing myself through to the next day. Every time that I thought about the situation that I had found myself in, I just burst into tears. I tried so hard to be positive and pushing myself to achieve my goals, but it just felt like it wasn't enough. Like it would never be enough because I was still so far away from where I wanted to be. I felt so stuck and trapped and tired, and I just felt like all of the time was just slipping through my fingers like sand. I was due back at the hospital to have my scans. I was weighing so much on the fact that he had said, at this appointment, we're probably going to be able to discuss a plan for the frame coming off. And I really thought that was it. In the next couple of episodes, I have a lot of videos that I kind of recorded whilst I was going through my recovery. I think it is different, me speaking about how I felt at the time and actually hearing me whilst I was going through it. So I'm going to play you some videos and you can kind of listen to where I was at this point. And this is kind of July 2021.
I really feel like lately it's been one bad week after another, just kind of things that are shit reminders, and the fact that a year ago I got my frame off and I thought I was getting my life back. It's so fucking hard to still be in this situation. I really hope I get some answers on Wednesday because I'm so done. I'm so tired. I'm so sick of this. It's honestly just feeling harder and harder to wake up every single day. And I hate it. Because I've been so strong. And I've just told myself I just need to keep going and I need to get through this. It just feels like it's never ending. I just want to wake up and that all of this has been such a bad dream.
The weight that I put on the hopes of a good outcome of that appointment just left me totally heartbroken and hurting. I went to my appointment and I just knew that I needed that good news, and it was the only thing that was going to help me to feel better at that point, to know that this was all going to be over soon. But I didn't get that. Things were still moving in the right direction, but my bones just needed more time to cook, as my surgeon called it, which just meant that they needed time to solidify and grow stronger so that they could take my weight. I must have spent about 6 hours crying consistently after that appointment. My heart was hurting so much. I really had to fall back on the support system that I had made. They reminded me how loved and capable and amazing that I am. I ended up feeling really stupid for being so devastated, thinking that it could have been worse news. I have already had worse news, like, why am I so upset over this? Then when I put things into perspective for myself, I wasn't able to leave the house without assistance. I needed to wash myself over the kitchen sink, and I have only been able to have 2 showers in the past 19 months. It was okay for some days to be tougher than others to get through. It was so comforting that on those days that I had such loving people around me to remind me that I was a lot stronger than I sometimes felt. It is something that I will forever be grateful for. One of the messages that I had got had said that one day this won't feel so raw and that I'll be able to turn this shitty experience into something wonderful. And I really hope with this podcast that that is something that I'm doing. I think that is where I am going to round it off for today. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Cripple Chronicles podcast. Next week, I am going to be talking about the support that I had from my friends that I managed to make during COVID that I have mentioned a few times throughout this episode as being the support system that I had along with my family. Getting back in contact with the ex that I ejected from the car and leaving the house a little bit more in what anniversary of the crash number 2 was like. If you are listening on YouTube, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, all that jazz. If you are listening on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, any other listening platforms, rate and review. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Cripple Chronicles Pod and email in anything you want to talk to me about at cripplechroniclespod@gmail.com. Anytime I try to do that bloody email, I always mess it up, but I swear I'm getting better at it. Anyway, see you next week. Bye!